grave he rose again, and as he stands.
As we think about resurrection, and we think about our own life in that resurrection of Jesus and what it means to us and how it touches us today, there was a line in the last song that we sang, or the last of the first set of songs we sang, and that was, "And that voice still goes throughout the ages." And that's how it is. So this morning we're going to ask the Holy Spirit to touch our lives as we not only hear the gospel from John chapter 20, but also as we talk about those things. Let's pray together. Holy Spirit of God, who is the power that lives within us, so that we might name the name of Jesus and give him glory. We ask you, Lord, that you, through grace, will touch our hearts this morning as Gord reads the scripture not only, but also as we think about what is being read. May it be, Lord, that it may touch our hearts in such a way that we might walk closer with you in this coming week and give you all the praise and the glory. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. I invite you to stand with me as Gord begins to read from John chapter 20, verses 19 to the end of the chapter.
Jesus appears to the disciples. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. For if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Not sure you've noticed, but it's fear that makes the world go round. It's just an observation that I made over the last week, last month, the last years, but I truly believe it to be true. Every time someone in the White House or in the Kremlin or in Tehran or some Africa country sneezes, the whole world tenses up. The stock markets fall. The gold goes up. People become afraid of another war, which might be just on the brink of happening. A commentator not a long time ago said that if Russia were to invade the Crimeas, we would have World War III, IV, V, and VI. We are a tense creation. Some folks are afraid because of their social life, or because of uncertainty in their jobs, or because of their health, or because of their marriages, or they're afraid for the lives of their children. And the world's answer to this, of course, would be a chorus that Diana Ross wrote. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love, not just for some, but for everyone. Remember that tune? If only. And yet, our scripture brings us back to Resurrection Day. The day of confusion, uncertainties, a day filled with good news and yet unbelievable news. There were several opposites in this event, and John enjoys telling us what they are. I want you to think about a couple of things. First of all, that there's a problem here. It ought to be the best day in all of the universe. It ought to be the day in which the birds not only chirped, the sun not only shone, but those who believed that Jesus was truly the Son of God would have been dancing down the streets of Jerusalem. And instead, where do we find them? In a room, hiding, locked doors, closed windows. And that's where John begins. Notice what it says. When it was the evening of the day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples were met were locked for fears of Jews, Jesus came and stood among them. John's simply playing with words. Well, he's doing a lot more. He's telling us the story the way it is. But he's playing with it in such a sense, because if you go back to John chapter 20, verse 1, it was early morning. And in that early morning, the women, just as the sun was beginning to rise, go to the grave. And as they go to the grave, they see that the stone has been rolled away. The angel says to them, "He is not here, for he is risen. And go tell your brothers." And they go and run off and tell the disciples. And then only in John do we find that Mary stays behind. And Mary Magdalene meets Jesus. And he gives her a job to do. He says, "I want you to go and tell Peter and the rest of the disciples." And the story is this, that she goes and she tells the disciples, and in Mark we find that what do? They don't believe her. They don't believe her. Matthew, same story. Luke, same story. They don't believe her. So now comes the evening, which is the opposite of the day. The sun isn't rising, but it is setting. The light isn't beginning to shine, it's beginning to wane. It's not becoming day, it's becoming night. And as we're going to discover as we go back to chapter 4 and beyond in John, the Gospel of John, as we begin to discover, those are important concepts to John. Jesus says in John that those who walk in the light have no fear of stumbling. Those who walk in the dark, will have that fear. And so so the disciples are meeting. And as the day began with great hope and expectations, you also need to begin to understand what the disciples are going through. Because no longer are they now just the followers of Jesus. No longer are they Galileans who should have died along with that rebel Jesus. But they are now also being accused of stealing the body of Jesus and bringing lies into the city, which says that Jesus rose from the dead, just like he said he would. Now you have to understand that the disciples are hidden somewhere, and there's no way they would have gone down into the streets and told that story. Number one, they didn't believe it. Number two, they were scared out of their wits. The darkness is coming, and that darkness becomes more and more oppressive. And one of the questions I would have asked if I were one of them would be, if he came to the women, why hasn't he come to us? I cannot believe that he's alive. The darkness is beginning to settle because the fear of the Jews is beginning to grow. And they're probably making plans on how to get out of Jerusalem back to Galilee. It was in the morning that Jesus showed himself to the women, but he hasn't come to the men. Interesting. And so the darkness begins to fall for them. Life goes from bad to worse. And I guess we know what that means. We've all been in places and stages of our lives where what was bad has just become worse. That pain that you felt in your side is no longer just a pain. It now becomes a heart attack. That pain that you had in your back is no longer just a pain. It's cancer. It's incurable. The accident happened wasn't really so bad, except that the person that you loved died. The friends that you thought you had are no longer your friends. And what do? We do the same thing the disciples do. We get the key, we lock the door, we let no one in. I remember when I was not in seminary, when I was in Stony Creek. I suffer from migraines, and if you've ever had a migraine, you will know how debilitating they are. You can't see. All you want to do is sleep. And when that begins to happen, then you become a tad depressed. And you make sure that no one turns on the light or the radio because you want to shut the world out. That's what the disciples did. They're locked in. Their hearts, their minds, they want to shut everything off. And yet they're so open to fear. And isn't that what happens a lot of times when we have that little thing that the doctor says, I might want to look at that again? Or when your boss calls you in unexpectedly, but you've heard rumors of layoffs. Or you call your best friend and you know she's home, but she won't answer the phone anymore. They're locked in. They're afraid of the Jews. They're afraid of what's going to happen. It's a state of depression almost. It's distress. And we get so afraid of the impending pain or the danger or the evil that lies around it. And so we may not be too critical of the disciples. Yes, it was a grand day because we know the end of the story, but what if we were there with them? Or what if we looked at our own life and we saw what was in front of us? I mean, we lock ourselves into upper rooms more times than we'd like to. Spurgeon, in his comments on Psalm 91, verse 5, has these marvelous words. It might be the cry of fire, the noise of thieves, or fancied appearances, or the shriek of a sudden sickness or death. We live in the world of death and sorrow. We may therefore look for ills as well as in the night watches, as beneath the glare of the broiling sun. Nor should this alarm us, for be the terror what it may, the promise is that the believer should not be afraid. And the Psalm 91:5 says, you will not be afraid of the terror by day or the arrow that flies by night. What should he be? Let us put it more closely. Why should we? And that is not be afraid. God the Father is here and will be here all through the lonely hours. He is an almighty watcher, a sleepless guardian, a faithful friend. Nothing can happen without his direction, for even hell itself is under his control. Darkness is not dark to him. He has promised to be a wall of fire around his people, and who can break through such a barrier? Think of that the next time fear comes to us. Fear might be like night to us, terrifying, scary, but God is with us in every single moment of our fear. God is there. And so is Jesus. As they're sitting there in their misery, as they wonder about their pain, as they look around and they talk to each other about the things that Jesus had done and all the hopes they had in him, and now the shame that they were bearing because he had died and they had believed in him. There's good news. Jesus comes. I don't know if you noticed or not, but we tend to be really hard on poor Thomas. I mean, poor Thomas is the one who we remember. Unless I see the nails and prints in his hand and the wound in his side, I'm not going to believe that he's alive. Well, Jesus spared them this hurt. And he comes into the room. How is not important. He comes into the room. And he speaks peace. It's not just, guys, you got it all wrong. Although in one of the Gospels it does say that Jesus berated them for their unbelief. But he comes in John as the peace giver. He takes away the turmoil that lies within their hearts, just the same way that they had felt and seen and experienced the day that he had walked with them on the sea and turned the violent storm into a sea of glass. Or the way that he had taken the storm of a woman whose son had died and raised him back to life. Or as he had taken away the pain and the heartache from Mary and Martha when he called out to Lazarus and he came forth from the grave. He comes. He just simply shows up. Revelation 3, verse 20 has this marvelous little passage. I stand at the door and knock. Anyone who would open to me, I would sup with him. We use that text an awful lot on people whose hearts aren't right with Jesus, but that's not who Jesus is writing to. He's writing to people whose hearts are right with him and who keep shutting him out. Those who've locked the door. Those who can't see any hope and have learned to distrust Jesus, are beginning to distrust Jesus. Jesus says, I'm knocking. But he didn't knock this time. He just came in. I like it how Don Francisco wrote it in his song. When Jesus, in the song of the resurrection with Peter, stands before Peter, and Don writes that light that came from everywhere drove shadows from the room. I like that notion. Because Jesus does exactly that. He brings peace. He doesn't bring just the physical peace. Jesus now comes to bring well-being to his disciples. Jesus comes and he touches their hearts and their minds and their spirits. And the first thing he does, he shows them his wounds. It's really me. Went to see the movie the other day called Heaven is Real. And the little boy was talking to his dad, and he was saying, or dad was saying, and Jesus walked with you? And he said, yeah, I sat on his lap. And he said, really? Yeah, and he said he had funny markings in his hands. It touched me because that's exactly what he showed to his disciples. I offer you my peace. I'm just not going to settle your hearts, boys. I'm going to give you peace. I'm going to give you peace that I won on the cross. My peace I give to you, he said earlier in John. But this peace that he gives now, it has been fought and won. Bought for by blood. It is a peace with God that no one can buy. It is being right with God, which is grace and grace alone. So he gives to them a total healing of the soul and of their mind, of their hearts, their bodies. And then he does something else. I imagine it takes a few minutes to get over the shock of the fact that Jesus is in the room, never mind that he's alive. But now he's speaking to them. In the other Gospels we read that he asked for fish and for bread, just to make sure that they understand that he's not some kind of a ghost. So he comes. See, the best thing in the whole universe that can ever happen to a human being is when Jesus comes. In the most unexpected moments of life, like trying to destroy the church and riding on a horse towards Damascus and being cut off by a living Christ. Or being in the depth of a darkness that you may have experienced somewhere, and you felt his gentle touch, his gentle tug, of gentle voice, however he came to you and gave you peace. When I get sick, I want to be just like a man who's become my hero in his fight against cancer. He has brain tumor. And that brain tumor is going to take his life. We all know it. Oh, he's doing everything that he can to destroy that brain tumor, but the doctor says it's one of those tumors that you can destroy right to its nub and it will come back. And sooner or later, it will grow, and we can't stop it, and you will die. I remember Ken telling me at that point, he turned to the doctor and he said, "Oh no, I will not die. I will just go and be with my Savior." And the first time I sat down and talked with him and Kathy, it was the kind of meeting where I was ashamed to have even come, because he held the key to joy that I could not hold fast to. And as I sat with him, I says, "So what are the prognosis?" And he smiled and he said two things I'll never forget. Same as yours. You're going to die. And he said, the second thing that he said was the fact that he was not ever going to be afraid. He said, "This is just God's way of telling me I don't ever need to retire." I look at Ken, his struggle, and I see that there's a man who understands what it means to have peace. But notice Jesus doesn't leave it there. He comes back a second time and he says, "My peace I give to you." And then he goes on to say, "As the Father has sent me, so I'm going to send you." Jesus didn't leave his disciples with just a sense of peace. He gave them a job to do. Jesus didn't come back to let them know that he was okay. He's alive. No worries. But he gave them the same task that the Father had given to him. And that task, beloved, hasn't changed. The Great Commission has never changed. One of the commentators said that it was very interesting how John takes both Pentecost and the Great Commission and puts them into just one small line, to make us think about the fact that when Jesus comes to us, it's just not to it's not just to help us to feel better, but rather Jesus comes to give us a task, to live as a believer, to live as one who is totally dedicated to the cause of Christ. And so, even though Jesus' task on earth is done, and I'm saying that very tongue-in-cheek because his task is never done, but even though his task on earth is done, he has won salvation for us. Our task is not. Our task is still simply to live the Word of God, to be about God's business in the things that he has called us to do, each of us in our own little corner. And in doing so, Jesus takes our focus off of our fears and the darkness that lies within us. I must be about God's business. Paul in Romans chapter 6 basically says the same thing. That if we have died with Christ, we shall also live with Christ. But to live with Christ means to live a Christly life. And so God calls us to that. He brings us good news. He brings us excellent news. And if you're locked in a room somewhere all by yourself, even if it's just simply emotionally, Jesus stands there offering you peace. And all you have to do is turn around and see him. Life goes down the dumps. It's not God's fault. He comes and offers us the greatest gift of all. His peace, his life. May it be that in this coming week, God will allow us to see that working in our lives. No matter what we think about the future, no matter what we think is happening all around us or even within us, that we might be reminded of the fact that we are God's children and therefore ought never to be afraid. Let's pray. Our hymn is Nearer, Still Nearer.